Welcome everyone to the Pearson Edexcel training on Unpacking the Speaking Exam for the GCSE Spanish 2024 specification. My name is Fiona Price. I was a languages teacher for over 20 years, including head of department roles. I have worked at Pearson Edexcel for 3 years, working on the new GCSE specification. My current role is Senior Qualification Manager for Languages, and I do lots of work with teachers and schools on training for the new specification and our other language qualifications. So let's get started. Firstly, we'll have a look at the agenda. In part 1 of today's session, we will look at each of the 3 tasks that make up the speaking exam. We will concentrate on the tasks that are either new or substantially different from the legacy GCSE course. In part 2, you will have the opportunity to apply the marking criteria to some exemplar material. We will be considering a read aloud example from both foundation and higher tiers and a higher tier picture task. There will be a lot of information in this session, but I will make it as clear as possible. If you have questions, it is likely they will be answered by the end of the training. If you find you do still have questions at the end, you can email teachinglanguages@pearson.com, or there is the option to attend one of our live training events throughout the year. You can check the dates for these on our Pearson Professional Development Academy website. At the end of the session, I will signpost these links and others that you need for further training and resources that may further help you with both your preparation for the speaking exam and other aspects of our qualification. Let's move on to today's goals for the session. These are firstly to ensure that you are familiar with what is new in the speaking exam and what is not. We will look in detail at the individual tasks and their respective mark schemes to help you to increase your familiarity with the requirements. You will then apply the mark schemes to the exemplar material and consider your marks against the marks awarded by our examiners. In the process, you will hopefully reach a good understanding of what examiners are looking for when awarding marks. And you will know where to look and who to ask for further guidance as you prepare your students for this qualification. Our first section is an overview of the speaking component. Speaking at a glance. This slide shows you the key details about timings and mark allocations for each task of the speaking paper. I'm going to highlight a few of the most important points. Firstly, the 3 tasks for the speaking paper must be taken in the specified order. Firstly, the read aloud with follow-on questions. Secondly, the role play. And thirdly, the picture task, which has 3 sections: the picture description, follow-on questions, and then the broader conversation. The demand of the task ramps steadily. Secondly, the timings, apart from the preparation time, are recommendations. Students will not be penalised if they do not meet the minimum recommended time for an individual section of the exam. Teacher examiners should encourage students to speak as much as they are able for each of the tasks, but they should use their professional judgment to determine when the candidate has no more to give. Any material beyond the stipulated maximum assessment times for the tier will not be marked by the examiner. Thirdly, after the initial starting subject from within the chosen thematic context, which the teacher uses to start the conversation can move into other thematic contexts depending on the student responses and at the teacher's discretion to get the best out of their student. There is a document of FAQs on the Pearson Qualifications website dealing specifically with the conduct of the speaking exam. There will be an administrative support guide available before the first exams, and we offer another training course, Conducting the Speaking. Here is some further background information on the design and aims of the speaking exam. In the speaking paper, students are assessed on their production of spoken target language in a range of defined and open situations. Students will be expected to use a range of the specified vocabulary and grammar in the specification, and the focus of the task will be taken from the thematic context or the transactional settings listed in the spec. Speaking tasks will feature content that is relatable and accessible to all students. Students are expected to do the following: Respond to visual, written and spoken stimuli. Use clear and comprehensible pronunciation when speaking the target language, demonstrating an understanding of sound symbol correspondences. Use language in different situations. Ask and answer questions, give opinions, and develop conversation. Use language to describe a visual stimulus, including specific required details. Provide extended sequences of speech using a range of vocabulary and grammatical structures from the prescribed lists as accurately as possible, including some more complex forms appropriate to the level of study. Students are also expected to refer to past, present, and future events. Let's talk about what's new and what's not compared to the previous specification. The main differences are the new read aloud task with a focus on SSCs, sound symbol correspondences, or phonics. This task is about pronunciation rather than having a perfect French, German, or Spanish accent. It is about being able to be understood by a sympathetic native speaker and in accordance with our holistic mark scheme. The picture task is based on a thematic context chosen in advance by the student and a choice of 2 pictures. We'll look at this in more detail later. Mark schemes are dealt with in more detail too on a later slide, as is the preparation time, with the additional 1 minute in the exam room for the read aloud. Annotating refers to students being allowed to write on the read aloud card during their preparation time. Please note that by grade targets, we mean that foundation tier is still grades 1 to 5 and higher tier is grades 4 to 9. Let's focus on the read aloud. Read aloud passage by tier. This is a new task for this specification. The focus is on assessing the accurate application of SSCs, sound symbol correspondences, or phonics, from the specified list published in Appendix 2 of the specifications. For each tier at each assessment series, there will be 6 candidate cards, 1 based on each of the thematic context, and 6 corresponding teacher cards. All rubrics will be in English on the cards. A range of SSCs from the list will feature in each read aloud passage, but the task will be assessed holistically. We'll look at mark schemes later. The SSCs are identical for each tier, so the tasks are differentiated in the following ways: the selection of vocabulary, the number of words to be read, the complexity of the sentences in the passage. As a further note, in Spanish, the understanding and use of appropriate stress patterns is a higher tier only requirement in the SSC list. Writers will not use repeated words or word families, for example, chante, chanteur, to avoid the risk of double penalising a student who produces a certain sound inaccurately. At both tiers, the passage for the read aloud will be mainly in the present tense. There may be a simple conditional, for example, me gustaría, and in Spanish, a near future may be used. There will be no past tense in the passage. Let's look at the follow-on questions by tier, which come after the candidate has read aloud their card. The follow-on questions are not seen by candidates in advance. These questions are related to the content of the read aloud passage, but they are not comprehension questions. The follow-on questions will be present tense or simple conditional. At foundation tier, the form of the questions will always be: what do you like to do, to eat, and so on, for question 1, and what do you think of, sports, cinema, etc., for question 2. So in Spanish, this could be: ¿Qué te gusta? ¿Qué piensas de? At higher tier, the structures will be more varied. Question 1 will still be a like question, but with a variety of structures. Question 2 will require the student to give an opinion using the following format, and which relates to an aspect of the text. So in Spanish, it could be: ¿Cuál es tu opinión sobre? ¿Cuál es tu opinión sobre los problemas del medio ambiente? The information about one-word answers is key. They will not get full marks for one-word answers, and this applies to this task, the role-play task, and the questions following the picture description. They don't have to use a verb in their answer, but it should be a minimum of 2 words, and ideally a short phrase or sentence rather than an extended answer. These slides look at the mark schemes for read aloud and follow-on questions. Important things to point out are the read aloud task is marked holistically, which means that pronunciation of all words in the text count towards the outcome. Students are assessed on how clear their pronunciation is, not on their French, German or Spanish accent. Students can be understood clearly even if their accents are anglicised. How comprehensible their pronunciation is. Comprehensible relates to how easy it is to understand the main points and ideas of the response as a whole. The foundation tier and higher tier mark schemes for this task overlap, with the bottom 2 bands of higher tier becoming the top 2 bands of foundation tier. We have provided examples of application of the marking criteria for the read aloud text in the SAMs, showing how lapses in SSCs impact on comprehensibility and cause the message to break down. The marking grid for the follow-on questions is identical for all tasks assessed under AO1, namely these follow-on questions, the role play, the compulsory questions following the picture description. The grid is applied to each follow-on question for the read aloud, so 2 lots of 2 marks, and the picture description, again 2 of 2 marks, and to each response to a prompt in the role play, which is 5 lots of 2 marks. These answer types are assessed for communication and comprehensibility rather than accuracy. For further guidance on the application of the mark scheme for each of these tasks, look at the SAMs on our website and published exemplars in each language for further exemplification of the application of the marking criteria. Let's look at the second task in the speaking exam, which is the role play. Role play by tier. Have a look at the similarities between tiers, the top half of the slide, and the differences, the bottom 2 rows, and I'll talk you through a few key features and some additional information. The role play contexts are set outside the thematic contexts, although there may be overlaps, and there are 10 set contexts, so there are no surprises and you can prepare your students for the scenarios they may meet in the exam. Each assessment series, Pearson will provide 6 role-play stimulus cards at each tier, which will use 6 different settings from the published list. The role-play will be in a formal context, where the teacher examiner will address the candidate as usted, vous, or Sie. In their responses, the student does not need to use the formal register. Students will be required to give and receive information, asking and answering questions. Compared to the previous specification, the rubrics are all in English. The role-play prompts are designed so that students can respond using vocabulary drawn from the vocabulary list. No prompt will rely on the candidate producing a specific item of vocabulary. For example, the prompt could be worded, "Say what activity you will do tomorrow," allowing the student to select from a range of activities during their preparation time and giving them a greater opportunity of success, compared to if we had stated something like, "Say you are swimming tomorrow," but the student couldn't remember how to say swimming. Expected responses should be a few words or short phrase. Sentences are fine, but not always necessary. One-word answers cannot score higher than 1 mark, so students need to reply with a minimum of 2 words. Note that at higher tier, although there is a prompt framed in a future time frame, there is no requirement for candidates to use the future tense in their response. You will see that the location of the question is in a predictable place. It is always prompt 5 for both tiers, and then in prompts 2, 3 or 4 for the second question in higher tier, but never the first prompt. Let's look at the role play mark scheme. The role play is marked for communication only against AO1. It is the same as the grid we looked at before for the read aloud follow-up questions. Role play responses are expected to be short, but must be of more than one word to be considered clearly communicated and gain the full 2 marks. This instruction is made clear to candidates on the stimulus card. There is no requirement for responses to be complete sentences containing a verb, as long as the response is fully communicated. Each response is marked using this grid to give a total of 10 marks for 5 responses. Just as a note, because this task is quite similar in approach to the legacy specification, we are not going to listen to exemplars of role plays in today's session. We are going to concentrate on the read aloud and the picture description and conversation. Let's go on to task 3 in the speaking exam, which is the picture description task and the conversation. Picture task and conversation by tier. As with the read aloud and role play slides, this looks at the similarities and differences between the tiers. This is a crossover task, with the description being differentiated by outcome and the conversation both by the demand level of teacher-examiner questions and the responses produced by the candidate. Only the compulsory questions are differentiated by tier. You'll see where the mark schemes overlap in the final row. The timings are given, but remember, as I explained before, these are recommended timings. Before we cover this section, I'd recommend freeing your mind from the 2016 qualification picture task. It is important for teachers and students to know that the new picture task description is different from that of the 2016 version, which makes up only one of the 5 questions on the card in that specification. In this new qualification, the picture task description is more substantial, as it is a task which carries 8 marks. To succeed in this task, it is essential that students describe the picture as fully as possible in the recommended time. Teachers should take advantage of using the given prompts to encourage students to say more if necessary. Remember, though, that students can choose their thematic context before the exam window opens and have a choice of 2 pictures, which increases the accessibility of the task. This is not the case for the 2016 qualification. Picture description. This slide displays what a student card for the picture task looks like. You can see the clear instructions in English about all aspects of the task. The thematic context will be chosen by the student from a choice of 2 options before the speaking window opens. There is more information about this in our Conducting the Speaking training, and there will be training on the sequencing tool to come before the first exam series. The student chooses which picture to describe in the preparation time and will tell you which picture they are going to describe at that point in the exam room. They only make notes in the preparation time on the picture they have chosen. The picture description has been designed so that students can respond to the stimulus using vocabulary drawn from the full vocabulary list. They could also use additional productive vocabulary they may have learnt in lessons, which would get equal but not additional credit. The requirement of the task is for students to describe the picture, focusing on 3 specific aspects: people, location, and activity, which is made clear by the 3 bullet points on the student card. It is expected that students provide enough information for it to be considered a description, rather than a brief mention of what they can see. These bullet points do not have to be covered in equal depth, but each bullet point must be addressed with a suitably detailed answer for higher, or 2 or more bullet points for foundation, for them to access the full range of marks for the task. They should develop their description as far as they are able to in the recommended time, and students are not limited to describing these details. The picture description is worth 8 marks, 4 for the content of what is said and 4 for the linguistic and grammatical accuracy. We recommend that students spend part of their preparation time for the picture task preparing grammatically accurate sentences in order to access the full mark range for this task. Teachers are permitted to prompt candidates who may have omitted to talk about people, location or activity, but only using set prompts, and up to a maximum of 3 times. There is also an anything else prompt in the target language. This slide highlights the segue into the conversation and the instructions to candidates. The thematic context will be known to the candidate already, as they will have selected it in advance, and there is a clear instruction about covering all 3 timeframes and developing responses fully. Let's look at the mark schemes for picture description at foundation tier and higher tier. We'll start with the foundation version. The format of the marking grids for the picture description and the conversation shows the layout we use for tasks across foundation and higher tier, where 2 grids are applied to the response. For the picture description, which is on this slide, there is 1 grid for AO2, response to stimulus, and 1 grid for AO3, linguistic knowledge and accuracy. Candidates are marked for the content of the description and for the accuracy of what they say. And the next slide is going to go on to look at the higher tier version. This slide is the higher tier version of the picture description mark scheme. If you want to look at these slides on the marking grids in more detail, you can pause the recording at this point. For comparison, in the broader conversation which comes after the picture description, there is 1 grid for AO1, response to spoken language, and 1 grid for AO3, linguistic knowledge and accuracy. Here, candidates are marked for the information conveyed in their responses to the conversation questions and for the accuracy of what they say. We'll look at these grids in a minute. In the sample assessment materials, there is additional mark scheme guidance, which gives definitions of what we mean by addressed, development, comprehensible, complex language, and variety, and we will also look at those terms later in this session. The SAMs also provide examples of what we consider to be major and minor errors. We updated our guidance on this for greater clarity in summer 2025, and you'll find the detail of this in our SAMs. We recommend you review these details in your own time. You'll find the SAMs on the Pearson 2024 GCSE website pages for each language. Compulsory questions mark scheme for both tiers. The description element of the picture task is followed by 2 unseen compulsory questions relating to the subject matter of the picture. The questions appear only on the teacher card as they must be unprepared by the student. Both questions will be about the student's own experiences, likes, dislikes, and opinions. These questions are very similar in format to the unseen questions following the read aloud and are marked using identical criteria, with the marking grid being applied per response and assessed for communication rather than accuracy. At foundation tier, the questions will be in the present tense or conditional. The second question on the foundation tier card is the same as the first question at higher tier. At higher tier, the second question will be in a past tense. Just a reminder that this AO1 mark scheme is the same as the read aloud follow-on questions and the role play, and is applied in the same way. Conversation mark scheme at foundation tier. For the broader conversation, there is 1 grid for AO1, response to spoken language, and 1 grid for AO3, linguistic knowledge and accuracy. Here, candidates are marked for the information conveyed in their responses to conversation questions and for the accuracy of what they say. We updated our guidance around the use of tenses in summer 2025, which is reflected in this grid and in our published SAMs. This is the higher tier version of the conversation mark scheme. If you compare it to the foundation tier version on the previous slide, you'll see the overlap between the grids at foundation tier 7 to 9 and 10 to 12, and higher tier 1 to 3 and 4 to 6. An important point about our holistic mark schemes is that they aim to reward students positively, and a best fit is applied here. The SAMs give more guidance on this, so I'd recommend having a look there. We also have a comprehensive set of exemplars in each language, and there is a speaking guide plus student support on preparing for speaking under our guides. The next two slides unpack some of the important terms that are used in the mark scheme grids for the picture task and conversation. Addressed, what that means in terms of how many of the 3 bullet points students cover from people, action, location. Developed, how much students are able to develop each point with detail, reasoning, justification, and/or elaboration. This does not have to be equal across the bullet points. Comprehensible, meaning how easy the 3 main points and ideas are to understand as a whole. The term complex language is used in the AO3 linguistic knowledge and accuracy grids. There are examples given here of what type of language this could include. Feel free to pause the recording here so you can take your time to read this through. Variety means the range of vocabulary and structures used. Remember that students may be taught or might use additional productive vocabulary outside the specified vocabulary list. If they use this in speaking, and it could apply to writing, this will be given equal but not extra credit. A reminder again that there is an FAQs document on our website that will look in more detail at some of the sorts of queries you are likely to have. Now we are going to apply the mark schemes to some exemplar material in Spanish. Just a reminder that these feature students who were not taught using the new specification syllabus, and these exemplars have not been standardised across a whole cohort, but the mark schemes have been applied in full and you will be able to see examiner commentaries. Also to reassure you that you are not expected to get everything totally right at this stage. You are new to these mark schemes, of course, and will need practice and discussion within your teams and time to absorb it all. This will support with gaining confidence in applying the criteria correctly and applying marks in line with the examiner's judgment. This is exactly why we are running this training, and we're aware that getting used to teaching a new specification takes time and your knowledge will improve over time. Please feel free to pause the recording at any point if you need more time to listen to the recorded exemplar again or reread the commentary or look back at mark schemes. Let's start with a foundation tier read aloud. Here you are intentionally not being shown the transcript as you listen, as this is to replicate the examiner experience. Having the transcript in front of you could prevent you from awarding marks correctly. The audio of a foundation tier read aloud passage is on this slide. As you listen, you need to look at the mark scheme on the slide or a printout and award a mark for the passage and a mark for each of the follow-on questions. The next slide is a transcript of what the student says.
Soy fan de Internet. Me gusta estar en línea. Prefiero escuchar la música con mi móvil. Uso mi ordenador para aprender lenguas nuevas. También es fácil chatear con mis amigos españoles por las redes sociales.
¿Qué te gusta hacer en línea?
1 año.
¿Qué te gusta hacer en línea?
TikTok.
¿Y qué piensas de las redes sociales?
Es importante.
Fantástico.
This is the stimulus card and transcription of what the candidate actually said. Decide what your marks are and make a note so you can compare with what the examiner awarded this task on the next slide. This slide has the examiner commentary and marks for the foundation tier read aloud task. Please pause the recording here if you need to, so you can compare to what you noted down as suitable marks. Now let's look at a higher tier read aloud. As with the foundation tier example before, I suggest playing the audio without looking at the transcript initially and look at the mark scheme to decide what marks you would give.
The test will now begin. Please read the text.
Cada miércoles intento jugar al voleibol. Con el horario que tengo, nunca encuentro tiempo para pertenecer a clubes, pero me apetece empezar el baloncesto de silla de ruedas ya que parece divertido. Pienso que la mayoría de los jóvenes no hace suficiente ejercicio y que son menos activos que antes.
Gracias. James, ¿qué te gusta hacer para mantenerte en forma?
Para mantenerte en forma, me gustaría jugar al tenis. Y, ya que mis amigos jugarlo y dirían que es muy divertido.
¿Y cuál es tu opinión de hacer deportes en equipo? ¿Cuál es tu opinión de hacer deportes en equipo?
No me gusta hacer deportes en un equipo, ya que como el equipo hace, se puede hacer muy bien, pero el equipo puede hacer mucho más mal.
Muy bien, gracias.
This is the stimulus card and transcription of what the candidate actually said. Decide what your final marks are and make a note so you can compare with what the examiner awarded this task on the next slide. On the next slide, the examiner commentary will also be revealed. This is the examiner commentary and marks for the higher tier read aloud task. Please pause the recording here so you can compare to what you noted down as suitable marks. Let's move on to a higher tier exemplar of picture description. There is the audio of the description and the picture stimulus the candidate is responding to. Listen and use the mark scheme on the next slide to decide your marks.
Describe the picture.
Hay 3 personas, 2 mujeres y un hombre. La mujer de derecha está llevando una camiseta azul y un dental marrón. La mujer en la izquierda está pagando para algo.
Sí.
Y el hombre es muy alto y tiene pelo gris. Hay en un supermercado. Sí.
¿Algo más?
Sí, la mujer en la derecha tienes un bolso.
¿Sí? ¿Y algo más?
Sí. No.
Muy bien.
This is the mark scheme for the higher tier picture description. You can use this to decide on your final mark. Please remember that a brief mention of each point is not enough to count as covering the bullet point with a description. This shows a transcript of the candidate's response. The next 2 slides will show you the mark awarded for AO2, response to stimulus, and the mark given for AO3, linguistic knowledge and accuracy. This shows the examiner commentary for AO2 and the marks awarded. This commentary is also available in a downloadable booklet on the Pearson website as part of our range of exemplars available. You can pause the recording here so you have time to read the commentary. Note the references to addressing bullet points, developing answers and comprehensibility. It is also worth looking at the last paragraph on best fit. This is a continuation of the examiner commentary, but this time for AO3. Again, you can pause the recording to give you time to read and look back at the original photo and/or the candidate transcript. It is worth looking at the references to variety and complex sentences, as well as best fit. Now we'll have a look at the compulsory questions. This slide contains the audio of the candidates' responses to the compulsory questions. Just as a reminder, at higher tier, question 1 is the same as question 2 of foundation tier, which is an opinion question, and question 2 is in the past tense. Once you have listened and decided on a mark out of 4 and looked at the transcript of what the candidate said, you will be able to see the examiner commentary and marks awarded. Just a reminder that the follow-up questions here, as for the read aloud follow-up questions and the role play, are marked for communication and comprehensibility, not accuracy.
¿Qué piensas de trabajar en un supermercado?
Creo que trabajar en supermercado es bien porque tengo experiencias laborales.
Sí, sí, muy bien. Y dime, ¿qué compraste ayer?
Ayer compró agua y pan.
Muy bien, gracias.
Pause here if you want to write down the marks before they are revealed. And now moving on to the conversation, which follows the picture description. This slide has an audio of the higher tier conversation exemplar. It also shows the teacher card for this part of the task. Notice the mandatory starter subject, which you can adapt to your own question as long as it is within that subject. It is also worth noting that the conversation can then move freely to other topics within and outside the thematic context, for example, into other thematic contexts, depending on the candidate responses and the questions you ask. There are suggested but not compulsory questions designed to elicit responses in different time frames, but you can ask your own questions. Use the mark scheme on the next slide to decide how many marks you would give in this case.
Dime, ¿qué asignaturas te gustan y no te gustan? ¿Y por qué?
Mi asignatura favorita es las matemáticas porque es muy lógico y estaba cuando soy mayor cuando soy joven, dime, estaba muy fácil y no me gusta mi química porque mi profesor es muy malo y por lo tanto mis notas son muy malos.
Uh-huh. Y dime, ¿qué opinas de las reglas de tu cole?
Repite, por favor.
¿Qué opinas de las reglas de tu cole?
Creo que mis reglas están demasiado estrictos.
Uh-huh.
Pienso que ellos necesitan menos reglas.
Menos reglas, ¿ah? Sí, sí. Y dime, ¿qué te gustaría estudiar el año que viene?
El próximo año me gustaría estudiar teatro porque me gustaría ir a Nueva York con mi colegio enseñar sobre actores famosos.
Qué bien, qué bien. ¿Y qué vas a hacer después de tus exámenes?
Después de mis exámenes, me gustaría a un festival, se llama Points East. Es un festival de música y sería fantástica.
¿Te gusta la música? ¿Qué tipo de música te gusta?
Me gusta pop y artistas se llama Beyoncé y Taylor Swift. Sí.
A mí me gusta también. Háblame de un viaje que hiciste con tu escuela. Un viaje que hiciste con tu escuela.
Este año, no, el año pasado,
¿Sí?
fui a Salamanca con mi escuela para después de exámenes, porque hice muy bueno.
¿Sí? ¿Qué hiciste en Salamanca?
Fui a una inglesa y una universidad de Salamanca y sí.
¿Qué comiste?
Comí muchas paellas y hamburguesas y bebí demasiado Fanta.
Qué bien. ¿Qué vas a estudiar para tus A-levels?
A mí no sé qué asignaturas quiero hacer. Probablemente me gustaría estudiar las matemáticas y quizás biología. Sí.
¿Sí? ¿Y en qué te gustaría trabajar en el futuro?
En el futuro me gustaría sería un banca, porque me gustaría trabajar con números, pero mi madre dijo que es muy aburrido y no le gustó.
Okay, muy bien. This is the end of test.
This is the higher tier conversation mark scheme. You can use this to decide on the mark for the picture task exemplar on the previous slide. The examiner mark and commentary will follow on the next slides. On this slide, you have the examiner commentary and the mark awarded for AO1, which is the response to spoken language in speech. I suggest you pause the recording at this point so you have time to read this through in full and focus on the main points around relevance, development, comprehensibility and best fit. When looking at relevance, note the comment about the range of topics that has been covered, both within and outside the starting thematic context. This slide shows the marks awarded for AO3, Linguistic Knowledge and Accuracy. Again, I would pause the recording at this point so you have time to read it through. The main points to consider here are around variety, timeframes, accuracy and best fit. This is the end of the exemplar marking part of the training. Resources and support. The next few slides have some signposting for resources and upcoming training. This slide shows the GCSE resources from Pearson. Coursebooks for all three languages have been published, with differentiated versions at foundation tier and higher tier, which can be used for co-teaching mixed ability classes. These can be purchased as standalone resources or with access to Active Hub, which can also be purchased as a standalone resource. Active Hub offers front-of-class activities, including pre-prepared PowerPoints, independent practice worksheets, and assessments at the end of each module and at the end of Year 10 and 11 and the end of the coursebook. These come with performance insights to help teachers to identify pupils' strengths and weaknesses. Please note that Pearson Edexcel's paid-for resources, as well as resources endorsed by Pearson Edexcel, are not a prerequisite for the delivery of Pearson Edexcel specifications. Paid-for resources may also be available from other publishers. This slide shows you the resources on Active Hub that are particularly relevant to speaking, the phonics PowerPoints for Read Aloud and the Speaking Confidence worksheets. Let's talk about further training and resources. There are a wealth of free resources on the Pearson Qualifications website for each language. There are exemplars, guides, banks of practice read aloud and dictation tasks, a teacher crib sheet for the speaking exam, advice on grade boundaries, a student speaking support PDF, and much more. We also have many opportunities for you to attend live and recorded training. See our Pearson Professional Development Academy link for more information. Let's review today's goals. We have recapped what's new and what's not in the speaking paper and increased familiarity with the individual tasks and mark schemes. We've also looked at exemplar material to understand how the mark schemes are applied by examiners. Finally, we looked at further support and training available. This slide has more information on the speaking exam timelines, and it's a flowchart format to show you the administration and running of the speaking exam. There will be training available on the new sequencing tool prior to the first live assessment session. We also offer another training course on the speaking exam, Conducting the Speaking, in live and pre-recorded sessions. Our languages subject advisor is Rebecca Waker, who many of you will have had contact with already. You can contact her in a variety of ways, by email, phone, by booking an appointment, and I really recommend signing up to receive regular updates from her on the latest qualification news and support. As well as our Pearson Edexcel Facebook page where you can get updates, Rebecca has a very active and well-monitored Facebook group just for Edexcel language teachers, which is a very positive space to get the information you need or be pointed in the right direction. Pearson Professional Development Academy. Our PD Academy is where you will be able to search by your subject and find further training courses you can book and attend. Feedback. As this is a recorded session of this training, there is not a specific link to feedback on this session, but you are very welcome to pass on any feedback to us via the channels I mentioned before. We've come to the end of our training for today. Thank you for listening, and I hope you found it useful and informative.